Hey guys, tonight we dive into something that might seem proper and elegant at first, but trust me, it's deeply fascinating. We're exploring what daily life was really like in the Victorian era. Yes, you heard that right. Forget the lavish ballrooms, the polished manners, and those picturesque period dramas for a moment. We're going to peek behind the curtain of 19th century Victorian Britain, all the way into the gritty details of everyday life that rarely make the history textbooks. How did families survive crammed into one-room homes in crowded, dirty cities? What was it like for children as young as 5 to work long hours in coal mines and factories? Why did some people have to sleep sitting up or even hanging over a rope just to stay off the streets at night? And how did anyone endure the foul air, harsh work, and rampant disease without the comforts we take for granted today? Brace yourself for some eye-opening and nose-wrinkling details. This won't be a glamorous tale, but it will be fascinating. Before we jump into the past, take a moment to get comfortable. Dim the lights, maybe turn on a gentle fan or some soft background sound. And if you enjoy these late-night history dives, consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. It really helps me continue these journeys. Feel free to let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I love seeing the global community gathered for these stories. Now, take a deep breath and relax. Let's ease into tonight's journey together, back to Victorian England, and uncover the untold details of daily life in that era. Imagine it's a chilly, gray morning in London, around the year 1850. A heavy fog clings to the narrow cobblestone streets, mingling with coal smoke from last night's fires. The first weak light of dawn is struggling to push through the soot-stained air. Down the lane, a few gas street lamps still flicker, casting an eerie yellow glow on the wet stones. The air smells of a mix of things you'd rather not imagine. A soup of horse manure, rotting garbage, and the acrid tang of smoke. Londoners of the time knew this all too well. It's the background scent of daily life in a city without proper sewers or regular trash collection. Now, picture a cramped alley off this street. The buildings rise high and close on either side, tall brick tenements with chipped paint and crooked doors. Laundry lines crisscross above, hung with tattered clothes that sway slightly in the dawn breeze. We step quietly into one of these buildings, careful on the rickety wooden stairs as we make our way up to a tiny room on the 3rd floor. Inside this single, drafty room lives a family of 6. They are just waking up to the cold morning. There's no separate bedroom, no privacy, just one space that serves as kitchen, living area, and sleeping quarters all at once. In the dim interior, we see John, the father, stirring on a thin straw mattress laid out on the floor. He's a gaunt man in his 30s, though he looks older by today's standards. Rough stubble shades his chin, and worry lines are etched deeply into his face. He pulls a threadbare blanket up over the shoulders of his wife, Mary, who is curled beside him, trying to hold on to a bit of warmth. Huddled next to them are their children, little Tom, who is 8 years old, and his younger sister, Lizzie, who is 5. The children sleep on a makeshift pile of old rags near their parents. In the opposite corner, on a narrow wooden cot, John's elderly mother is wrapped in a quilt. She coughs lightly in her sleep. Yes, 3 generations of the Harris family all share this one tight room, barely larger than an average modern kitchen. As John sits up, he can see his breath puffing in the icy air. There's frost on the inside of the small window glass. London winters are damp and unforgiving, and without any heat source except a little coal stove. now cold because coal costs money they can't spare through the night. The chill has seeped into their bones. Mary shivers awake as well, drawing an old shawl around her thin shoulders. She moves quietly so as not to wake the little ones just yet. They could use a few more minutes of sleep before the day's hardships begin in earnest. John strikes a match and lights a stub of a candle. Its weak glow reveals peeling wallpaper stained with soot and damp. In one corner of the room lies a jumble of possessions, a few spare clothes, darned and re-darned, and a dented tin trunk with whatever small keepsakes they have. There's a rickety table with a couple of chipped cups and tin plates. A single shelf holds their kitchenware, a pot, a pan, and a wooden spoon. A hard heel of bread sits on the shelf too, left over from yesterday. That will be breakfast, maybe with a bit of tea if they're lucky. Mary gently coaxes the small coal stove back to life. She has a precious handful of coal and some kindling set aside. When she opens the stove's vent, the last embers from last night emit a faint glow. She adds a twist of paper and wood scraps, carefully nursing a flame. Soon, a tiny plume of smoke curls up, and she feeds a couple of coal pieces onto it. The stove is just an iron box, really, but it's the heart of their home. It cooks their food and gives a bit of warmth when there's fuel to burn. Now, let's imagine the sounds as the city around them starts to wake. Through the thin wooden door and the even thinner wall to the next apartment, muffled noises seep in. There's a baby crying somewhere down the hall, and a couple arguing loudly 2 floors below. From outside, through that little window's cracked pane, comes the clop-clop of hoofbeats on cobbles as a milkman's cart passes and the distant shout of a street seller hawking something, perhaps muffins or early morning hot coffee. As the fog begins to lift slightly with the growing light, the silhouette of factory chimneys and church steeples emerges in the smoky sky. In the far distance, a factory whistle shrills, signaling the start of a work shift. Mary takes a metal pail and slips out the door to fetch water from the common pump in the courtyard below. The hallway is dim and foul-smelling. With so many people and no proper sanitation, there's always a lingering odor of waste and mildew. Some neighbors resort to dumping their nighttime chamber pot contents in the stairwell corners if it's too cold at night to go outside, which only adds to the stench. The wooden floorboards creak under Mary's feet. She steps around a broken stair that nobody has fixed. Other doors are opening too. Neighbors emerge into the cold gloom of the corridor. A weary-eyed mother across the hall shifts a wailing infant to her hip while trying to herd 2 other sleepy children along. Her day is starting much like Mary's. An old man in a ragged coat shuffles by, headed out, perhaps to look for day labor at the docks or market. People exchange quick nods or murmured greetings, but there's little time or energy for conversation. Outside, Mary crosses a small courtyard where the communal water pump stands. A couple of other women with buckets are already there, gossiping in low voices despite the early hour. Mary waits her turn, her breath a white cloud in the crisp air. She braces herself and grips the iron pump handle, working it up and down. The pump squeaks rhythmically until a stream of water spills into her pail. The water is murky and has a metallic smell. She knows this pump isn't very clean. In summer, it's sometimes even worse, tasting of rot. They don't understand the science of it, but the women know the water can carry sickness. Mary will boil it later for tea, which helps a bit. Back upstairs, John has quietly woken little Tom. At 8, Tom is old enough to help out or even earn a few pennies himself. John ruffles the boy's hair and helps him into a threadbare wool coat that's a couple sizes too big. It used to be John's long ago and has been patched at the elbows. Mary returns with the water, her arms aching from the weight of the bucket. She sets it down carefully. Despite the cold, she's broken a sweat from hauling it up 3 flights of stairs. By now, Lizzie is awake too, rubbing her eyes with her tiny fists. Mary pours some of the water into a dented kettle and swings it over the stove to boil. The luxury of a hot cup of tea will do them all good. Fortunately, she still has a pinch or 2 of tea leaves left in a tin. She'll stretch it by making the brew very weak, practically just tinted hot water. For the children, she might thin it further with a bit of milk, if there's any, or just give them mostly warm water with a splash of tea for taste. Tea is more than a comfort. Boiling the water makes it safer to drink, and the little bit of caffeine will steel John and Mary for the long day ahead. Mary cuts the hard loaf of bread. It takes some effort. The bread is dense and a couple days old. Using a worn knife, she saws off a few rough slices. There's no butter or jam. Those are beyond their means, except on very special occasions. Instead, Mary scrapes the bottom of a small jar for any remnants of dripping. That's the fat from roasted meat, which they sometimes can afford a spoonful of to spread on bread for flavor. Today, the jar is essentially empty. She gets barely a fingertip of grease to smear on one of the slices. Still, she offers that piece to her mother-in-law, tucking it into the old woman's gnarled hands. The elderly woman smiles weakly in thanks. For the rest of the family, the bread will be eaten plain. They sit together on the edge of the mattress and the 2 rickety chairs they have, cradling cups of warm, weak tea and nibbling the bread. Little Lizzie, still waking up, takes a bite and makes a face. The crust is tough and she's missing a couple of baby teeth, but she chews dutifully. Tom dunks his portion in his tea to soften it, watching the brown liquid soak into the bread. John eats his share in a few quick bites. It's not much, just enough to quiet the morning hunger pangs. He washes it down with the last gulp of hot tea, feeling the warmth spread in his belly. For a brief moment, as they gather and eat, they almost feel a cozy domesticity. They might even manage a bit of small talk. Perhaps Mary mentions that a neighbor on the first floor had a new baby, or John quietly notes that he heard a rumor of extra work down at the docks this week. But mostly, they concentrate on eating and planning the day. When breakfast is done, John stands and wraps a threadbare scarf around his neck. His coat is a heavy twill frock coat, shiny at the elbows and frayed at the cuffs from years of wear. Mary quickly comes over and sews one of its buttons that was hanging loose. She keeps a needle and a bit of thread handy for such emergencies. The children tug on their worn boots. Tom's have holes, and Mary has stuffed the toes with bits of cloth to keep his feet warmer. Lizzie's are actually boys' boots someone gave them, far too large. So she wears extra socks, mismatched and full of darns themselves, to make them fit. Before John and Tom depart, he squats down and gives Lizzie a little hug. "You be good for Mum, all right?" he says softly. Lizzie nods and plants a kiss on her father's cheek. Mary, who is holding the door ready to see them off, manages a tired smile and whispers, "Come back safe, love." It's both a blessing and a plea, offered every morning. She's acutely aware of the dangers out there for a working man, whether it's a sudden accident or a deadly illness. John gently squeezes her hand in reply. They don't need many words. That brief touch carries both affection and the mutual worry they always feel when apart. John then rests a hand on Tom's shoulder. "Ready, son?" he asks. The boy straightens up proudly, nodding. He's trying to be brave and grown up. John must rely on him today. Tom has his own small task. He delivers newspapers in the mornings for a printer, a small job that brings in a few pennies a week. It's not much, but every bit helps, and importantly, it means one more set of hands contributing rather than empty mouths to feed. They step out into the chilly hallway and then to the street. Mary stands in the doorway for a moment, watching them go. "Take care of your father, Tom," she calls softly down the stairs, not too loud. They don't want to wake anyone who might still be asleep. Tom waves back, and John nods. With that, Mary closes the door and prepares to start her own long list of chores, while John and Tom merge into the flow of early morning workers outside. Outside, the city greets them with a gust of cold, damp wind that smells of soot and river muck. John instinctively pulls Tom close as they navigate the bustling street. They step around heaps of refuse that have piled up along the curbs. The mud underfoot is mixed with horse manure from countless cart trips. There's no street cleaner coming, at least not in these parts of town. A couple of ragged men with shovel and broom, informal sweepers, are trying to clear a particularly bad patch in hopes a passerby might toss them a coin for their efforts. As father and son walk, the sun is still a pale disk behind layers of smoke and fog. The street is coming alive now. Vendors push handcarts, calling out their goods in melodic cries. "Hot coffee, penny a mug," shouts one, the fragrant steam tempting tired workers with a warm jolt of energy. Another cart trundles by with a man selling fresh baked baked potatoes. The smell of the roasted, charred skins is mouth-watering, though John doesn't break stride. He has no spare pennies for treats this morning. Women in aprons are opening up little stalls selling bread or pies. The more well-to-do workers might buy a hand pie to eat on the way to work. But for John, that's an impossible luxury on most days. They pass two tall, bobbing figures in dark blue coats and helmets. Policemen, bobbies, on their beat. The officers cast stern glances around, eyeing a group of loitering youths at a corner. John remembers a time before these organized police existed. The Metropolitan Police were only established in 1829, just 2 decades ago. Back then, law and order in such areas were even more tenuous. He gives them a respectful nod as he passes. The police nod back, but keep moving. Here in the East End, they know they walk a fine line, keeping order among people who often view them with distrust. The farther John and Tom go, the busier and louder the streets become. They approach one of the main roads leading towards the docks by the river. Horse-drawn omnibuses rattle by, carrying clerks and shopkeepers to their jobs in the city. Those omnibuses are basically big carriages that can fit a dozen or more people, and their wheels clatter on the stones while the driver atop snaps a whip lightly to urge the team of horses on. Tom peers at one that goes by, its sides painted with an advertisement for Pier's soap, showing a cherubic child in a washtub. The child on that omnibus poster looks nothing like the grimy, thin children he sees around him. He wonders if children somewhere truly look like that. Soon, they reach a fork in their routes. Tom's newspaper delivery run is off to the right, down through a warren of lanes where various printing shops and businesses will be expecting their daily paper. John kneels to double-check the bundle of papers under Tom's arm, making sure they're tied securely with twine. "You remember your route?" he asks quietly. Tom nods, reciting a few street names. He's done it enough times by now. John must let him go on alone. He wishes he could accompany the boy the whole way for safety, but John has to turn left toward the docks to try to secure work for the day. He gives Tom's shoulder a reassuring squeeze. "Off with you then. Be smart, be careful," he murmurs. Tom musters a brave grin. "Yes, Dad. See you later," the boy says and trots off, a small figure weaving into the crowd, clutching the newspapers tightly. John watches him for a moment, heart clenching, as the boy disappears around a corner. It goes against every parental instinct to send a child out alone in this city, but needs must. Tom will be careful, John tells himself. He turns and heads toward the docks at a brisk pace, joining streams of other laborers moving in the same direction. Let's follow John now to the docks by the River Thames. If London is the heart of the British Empire, the docks are its arteries. This is where goods from all over the world pour in. Spices from India, cotton from Egypt and America, timber from Scandinavia, foodstuffs, rum, tea, coffee, you name it. And also where Britain's manufactured exports leave. The docks are a forest of masts and cranes, and first thing in the morning, they are teeming with activity. John approaches a particular dockyard where he knows casual laborers, like himself, gather each morning hoping to be hired. He joins a large crowd of men at the gate, all jostling, trying to be visible. It's a daily ritual known among them as the call-on. There's a ship that arrived overnight that needs unloading. Word spread that laborers were needed here today. A foreman with a clipboard and a bowler hat comes out and looks over the crowd. In an instant, dozens of men surge forward, calling out, "Oi, sir, take me," or waving their arms. It's a pitiful thing to see. Grown men, many with families at home like John, all desperate for a day's work and pay, shouting and pleading to be picked. John's heart thumps. If he isn't chosen, he gets nothing today except the prospect of returning home with disappointment and empty pockets. He positions himself towards the front, shoulders squared, trying to look strong and ready. The foreman points a finger. You. One by one, he selects the fittest, or perhaps those he recognizes as steady hands. For a terrifying second, it seems John might be passed over. The foreman's eyes drift over him without a flicker. But then, a stroke of luck, or perhaps the foreman recalls John from a previous hire. "You," the foreman barks, jabbing the finger in John's direction. John steps forward quickly, nearly sighing aloud in relief. He has a job today. He and about 15 other men are ushered through the gates. The foreman is already giving instructions. A ship moored along the wharf needs its cargo unloaded and stored in the warehouse. John joins the queue to receive a burlap shoulder pad to protect against splinters and chafing, and then they file up the gangplank into the ship's hold. The work begins immediately and without mercy. By 7 a.m., John is already straining under 100-pound sacks of goods on his back, lugging them from the ship's belly to the docks. The cargo today is diverse. One moment he's heaving heavy burlap sacks of coffee beans that leave a trail of rich, bitter aroma in the air. The next, he's rolling oak barrels of raw sugar from the West Indies. Grains of brown sugar spill out and crunch underfoot. There are crates marked Manchester, filled with finished cotton cloth, and others stenciled with far-off origins like Calcutta, containing tea chests sealed in lead. John doesn't really think about how these goods got here, or where they're going, only that they are heavy and must be moved. Occasionally, a barrel leaks or a crate cracks open, and a hint of its contents escapes. The sweet, cloying smell of molasses from a broken cask of rum, or the spicy perfume of tea leaves from a split chest. The dockers might joke grimly, "There's our breakfast," when the aroma of coffee wafts by, but none of those luxuries are actually for them. It all heads to merchants and factories. John balances a crate on a handcart and wheels it down the gangplank. The dock scene around him is chaotic. A network of workers passes items in a human chain for smaller goods. Larger barrels are muscled onto crude lifts. The constant thud of crates being set down, the foreman's shouts, and the cawing of seagulls overhead create a cacophony. Every sense is assaulted. The whirring of a crane hoisting timbers off a schooner, the sharp cries of men coordinating a heavy lift, the churn of the river against the wharf pilings, the omnipresent soot and dust swirling in the cold air. Not that the river smells fresh. The Thames is brown and murky, burdened with the waste of millions. When the breeze turns, it carries a gagging stench of raw sewage and rot from the water. Even these hardened laborers, used to foul conditions, sometimes wince at that smell. But they carry on. There's no choice. It's backbreaking work. John's muscles strain and burn, but he dares not pause beyond a few seconds. The foreman keeps a hard eye on them, calling out anyone he thinks is slacking. At one point, a barrel slips from a fellow worker's grasp and crashes to the ground, smashing open. It was full of fine porcelain dishes, now a heap of shards. The foreman unleashes a stream of curses and docks that man's pay for the damage. John works even more cautiously and quickly after that, despite his fatigue. He can't afford a costly mistake. As John hauls load after load, let's step back for a moment and consider. This bustling port with goods from across the globe might seem exciting on the surface, but for laborers like John, it's punishing. There's no job security. He's hired today, but tomorrow he could just as easily be turned away. The pay is usually by the day or by the task. If he manages to work the full day without the call to labor ending early, he might earn maybe 3 or 4 shillings for these hours of toil, a decent day's wage for an unskilled laborer. But from that, he'll have to immediately set aside money for rent and maybe a bit of coal or food. And the work itself could injure him at any moment. A poorly tied bale could fall, a mistimed lift could wrench his back, or a slippery plank could send him tumbling. Not far from where John is sweating and grunting, a couple of ragged children have climbed down to the muddy riverbank, which is exposed at low tide. These are mudlarks, kids, and sometimes desperate adults, who scavenge along the filthy shores of the Thames when the water retreats. John barely notices them, but they're wading ankle-deep in foul mud, searching for anything that might have dropped from a ship or been tossed from the docks. Bits of coal that can be reused, stray coins, scraps of metal, pieces of old rope or cloth. It's dangerous and dirty. The mud can suck them in if they're not careful, and it's laced with human waste and sharp objects. But for these mudlarks, a half bucket of coal or a few bits of copper could mean a meal today. Such is the array of desperate enterprises in this city. Wherever there is even a slim chance to eke out a living, someone will endure filth or risk to try it. Meanwhile, back in the little apartment, Mary has finished tidying up after breakfast. She coaxes the children to help. Tom isn't there, of course, but Lizzie tries her best to fold the blankets. Mostly, she ends up playing hide and seek under them, which at least makes Mary smile. Mary's mother-in-law, the old woman, has fits of coughing that Mary tries to soothe with a bit of warm tea and a peppermint drop. The fire in the stove is already dying down to embers. Mary can't afford to burn more coal except when cooking or in the worst cold. She wraps a shawl around the old woman's shoulders for a bit of extra warmth. It's mid-morning now, and the fog has given way to a dreary, overcast daylight. Mary has work to do outside the home today. She does not have a regular job. Very few married working-class women did, aside from taking in piecework or day labor because they had children and home duties. But many still contributed to the family income in informal ways. Mary, for instance, sometimes earns a few pence by washing laundry for a nearby tavern and a couple of shopkeepers. Washing clothes in these conditions is arduous, messy work. We'll see in a moment. Other days, she might help a seamstress friend by doing some stitching. Mary's not very fast, but she can sew a straight seam, and every little bit earned counts. If nothing else, she'll go out and try to find cheap scraps of food or coal to stretch their supplies. She chooses her next steps carefully. If they're bruised or rotten, the laundry she collected won't come out clean, and if she's washing with bad water or soap, it's a problem. Many items sold to the poor are not pure or good quality. Mary is always wary of too-good-to-be-true bargains. A cheap piece of meat might be from a diseased animal, or a fresh pie might be filled with spoiled leftovers. She's heard horror stories. Bread from some dishonest bakers padded with chalk or alum to make it look whiter. People who eat that bread get terrible stomach cramps. Tea leaves that have been swept off tea shop floors, dried, and mixed with leaves from random plants, sometimes even colored with poisonous dyes, and sold as cheap tea. Or milk watered so thin that sellers add chalk powder to make it white again. Almost anything can be tampered with to increase profit. But Mary sticks to basics she can trust, like these potatoes and greens she bought earlier. You can see a potato is a potato. Even if one has a bad spot, she can cut it out and use the rest. Waste is not an option when every penny counts. Today is wash day for Mary. She has a bundle of laundry that a tavern keeper's wife gave her, stained tablecloths, aprons, and towels from the tavern, and they need to be scrubbed, boiled, and rinsed. Doing this at home in their cramped room would be almost impossible, and certainly unwelcome to her neighbors, since it would soak the floor and walls. Luckily, the area has a public washhouse not too far away. These washhouses were a relatively new social reform at the time, a place where for a small fee, women could go use big sinks, boilers, and maybe even a mangle, wringer, to do laundry, instead of washing everything in a tub at home. Not everyone could afford the fee, but when one has a bigger load, like Mary does today, it's worth it. Mary prepares to head out. She wraps the soiled linens in a sheet and ties it into a bundle, which she hoists onto her hip. She drapes her heaviest shawl around herself and little Lizzie, who of course must come along. There's no one to watch her at home except the ailing grandmother, and that's not safe. Lizzie protests slightly. The toddler doesn't like the heavy smell of soap or the steamy heat of the wash house. But Mary soothes her by promising they'll stop by to see a neighbor's kitten on the way back, a small treat the child loves. Carrying the laundry bundle and holding Lizzie's hand, Mary steps into the street. This time, she heads in a different direction than John took. She navigates through a maze of narrow lanes where the buildings lean in so closely overhead that the sky is just a thin ribbon of gray. Children too young to work or go to any sort of school play in the alleys. A couple of boys are kicking a rag ball around. A gaggle of little girls play a clapping game and jump over puddles. Many of these children have no shoes, their bare feet muddy and cold. They shriek and laugh. Children will find moments of joy even in squalor. But Mary casts a stern eye as she passes, warning them to mind the laundry she's carrying. The last thing she needs is someone splashing sludge onto it. She passes by a corner gin shop, a cheap bar, where, shockingly, a few people are already drinking, though it's barely midday. Likely night shift workers or hopeless souls who start on the mother's ruin, gin, early. A man tumbles out the swinging door, red-nosed and bleary-eyed, almost colliding with Mary. "Watch it now," she says sharply, more fearless than one might expect. Women in these neighborhoods often had to be assertive to get by. The man mumbles an apology and staggers off. Mary wrinkles her nose. The smell of cheap gin is potent, even in the open air. She is keenly aware how alcohol can destroy families. She's seen neighbors descend into drunken violence or neglect. It's one of her constant worries that John might someday take to heavy drinking under the strain of life. Thankfully, while he enjoys an occasional ale with supper when he can, John has so far resisted that slippery slope. Both of them quietly know they simply can't afford it, neither in money nor in its toll. After about 15 minutes of walking, Mary arrives at the public wash house. It's a plain brick building with a wide entrance. Inside is warm, almost too warm, and humid with clouds of steam. The sound of women chatting, water sloshing, and an occasional scrub brush slapping against a washboard fills the air. The wash house has a line of big basins and a few large vats for boiling linens. It's not free. Mary will have to pay a small fee for the use of hot water and soap. She counts out the coins in her apron pocket carefully and pays the attendant, then finds an empty basin. Lizzie sits on the floor beside her mother, occupying herself by wrapping a rag doll, more of a bundle of cloth with a drawn-on face, in a leftover dry towel. Mary rolls up her sleeves and plunges the tavern linens into the basin she's filled with hot water. The water instantly turns grayish-brown as the dirt and ale stains start to loosen. She takes a bar of harsh lye soap. It's rough on the skin, burned down to a small sliver, and scrubs it along the fabric, then begins working the cloth against the metal washboard. This is heavy labor. She must scrub each item thoroughly, rinse it, boil it in one of the big coppers if it's very soiled, then wring it out. Her arms ache with the effort, and her hands, already chapped from winter cold, sting as the soapy water finds every crack in her skin. But Mary sets her jaw and carries on, one garment after another. All around, other washerwomen are doing the same. The women's conversations flow around her. Some talk about the steep price of bread these days, or swap news about a new factory rumored to open nearby. They gossip a bit too, about neighbors or the goings-on in the market. As Mary scrubs, she overhears snippets of their talk. One heavy-set washerwoman near Mary slaps a wet apron against the washboard and grumbles. "These stains are worse than last week, I swear. My back's near broken. And for what? A few pennies." She heaves a sigh. Another woman next to her, elbows deep in suds, clucks sympathetically. "Better than nothing, dear. Least we got some work today," she replies in a resigned tone. A third woman, younger and with a nervous look, pipes up. "Me husband came home with not a farthing last night. No ships in at his dock. I had to pawn my Sunday dress this morning to buy bread." The heavy-set woman tuts. "This city, it's a devil. Works you to death and still wants more." They exchange tired laughs and head shakes. Dark humor and commiseration are how they cope with the bitterness of their situations. Mary mostly keeps to herself, focusing on the tavern linens. She does allow herself one comment when the topic of bread prices comes up. "I paid threepence halfpenny for a loaf not half the size it used to be," she murmurs to her neighbor as she hauls a steaming tablecloth out of the boiler with a wooden paddle. The neighbor nods vigorously. "They're saying the flour's been coming in poor. I think the bakers cheat us," the woman responds. Mary just sighs. Everyone knows the bread is often adulterated or underweight, but what can they do? Complaining doesn't put food on the table. After a solid 2 hours of labor, Mary's load of laundry is finally clean. The once-stained tablecloths are now a respectable dull white, the towels and aprons free of visible grime. She's exhausted. Sweat beads on her forehead, and her arms feel like lead. Little Lizzie has grown restless, tugging at Mary's skirt, eager to leave this steamy hall. Mary hauls the heavy, wet laundry into a basket. She has the option to use a wringer at the wash house, which she does. cranking the dripping pieces between two rollers to squeeze out excess water. Still, they remain quite damp and heavy. She slings the clean laundry bundle, nearly as big as when it was dirty, but heavier with water, over her shoulder. Now she must deliver it back to the tavern owner's wife for drying and ironing. At least Mary's part, the washing, is done, and she'll get her payment. Maybe, if the tavern wife is pleased, she might even give Mary a bowl of stew or a pint of small beer to take home. Some clients did that, out of pity or kindness. Lizzie in tow, Mary retraces her steps. The streets are livelier now. A group of schoolboys in neat caps and coats, clearly from a better neighborhood or on their way to a charity school, cross her path, laughing and shoving each other in typical boyish play. The contrast is striking. Those boys, though hardly rich, at least look relatively clean and carefree compared to the barefoot urchins Mary saw earlier. It reminds Mary of her own Tom, and she hopes he's safe on his paper route right now. On the way, she passes a line outside a bakery where they're selling the day's bread. Even at midday, there's a queue. Bread is the staple of life, and everyone needs it. Mary doesn't have time, nor spare money, to join the line now. She'll likely send Tom or go herself in the evening to buy a loaf for tomorrow. Past the bakery, she sees the looming brick bulk of a workhouse down the road. Its tall, grim walls and narrow windows give it the look of a prison. A shiver runs down Mary's spine as she walks by. The workhouse was designed to be a deterrent, and life inside its walls was deliberately made harsh and austere. It's no surprise that many destitute people feared the workhouse so deeply that they spoke of it with dread. Some will sleep on the streets or beg until their strength fails rather than enter those forbidding walls until desperation or the authorities finally drive them in. For a moment, Mary's mind drifts to a friend of hers, a woman named Alice, who lived a few doors down until last winter. Alice was a widow with 3 young children. Her husband had died in a railway accident. He was a navvy, a railway construction laborer, killed when an embankment collapsed. Alice tried to survive by taking in sewing and doing odd jobs, but there just wasn't enough. Mary would sometimes share a loaf or some soup with them, but neither family had much to spare. Eventually, Alice couldn't pay the rent and they were evicted. Mary vividly remembers the day she saw Alice on the street with her children, eyes hollow from humiliation and worry. There was no magic savior waiting. The charity of neighbors can only go so far. In the end, Alice and her little ones went to the workhouse. Mary visited her once there. What a heartbreak. They wouldn't let Alice keep her children with her. They were separated into the women's ward and the children's ward, only allowed to see each other briefly on Sundays. Alice looked like a ghost of herself, scrubbing floors from dawn till dusk for the meager meals they provided. The children had their hair shaved short to control lice and wore coarse uniforms. Mary left that visit in tears, and she prays fiercely that such a fate never befalls her family. That looming workhouse building always reminds her, keep struggling, no matter what, to stay out of there. She tightens her grip on Lizzie's hand and shifts the weight of the laundry bundle. Come, love, nearly there, she mutters to the child. Lizzie skips a little to keep up. Despite the hardship of the morning, Mary feels a small surge of accomplishment. She turned a pile of dirty rags into clean ones and will get paid for it. In a life with so little control, even that small agency feels good. Mary reaches the tavern, a smoky den with sawdust on the floor. Around the back, she finds the tavern keeper's wife in the kitchen. The woman, flushed from cooking and overseeing the barmaids, greets Mary with a curt nod. She inspects a few items from the bundle. "Nice and clean, good," she says. She hands Mary a few coins, 8 pence for the lot of washing. 8 pence, that's 3 pence in pre-decimal currency. May sound like nothing, but it might buy a loaf of bread and some vegetables for stew if spent carefully. The woman, feeling in a moderately generous mood, also ladles out a tin mug of broth from a pot on the stove. "Here, take this for your trouble. It's just leftover soup," she says brusquely. Mary is grateful. The broth is thin, mostly water and a few floating cabbage bits, but it's warm and will help feed the children. She thanks the tavern wife quietly and departs. Now, with the small payment and the warm mug of soup, carefully covered with a rag to keep it from spilling, Mary heads home with Lizzie. On the way, she stops at a market stall. There, she spends a precious penny on a handful of carrots and a small bunch of wilted greens. She also manages to get a scrap of salted bacon from the butcher by negotiating. It's really just a bit of rind and fat trimmed off a larger cut, which many would throw away. But the butcher knows Mary's situation and lets her have it for a farthing, a quarter penny. These will go into the pot for dinner tonight to add flavor. Mary chooses everything carefully. She knows too well how unscrupulous vendors might try to foist rotten produce on unwary buyers or short-weight them on purchases. Today she sniffs the carrots. They're a bit soft but not rotten, and checks the greens for too many slimy leaves. Satisfied enough given the price, she pays and tucks them into her apron. Walking through the busy street, Mary feels the ache in her arms and shoulders. Lizzie, tired from trotting alongside all morning, starts to lag and whimper that her feet hurt. Mary adjusts her shawl and picks the little girl up, resting her on her hip. Lizzie wraps her arms around Mary's neck and, despite being hungry and cranky, soon dozes off against her mother's shoulder. Mary's back twinges at the added weight of the child, but there's a kind of comfort in holding her daughter close. They turn a corner and nearly collide with a commotion. A couple of coppers, police, have collared a young boy, couldn't be older than 13, who is kicking and yelling. "Let me go!" he cries, Cockney accent thick. The constables hold him firm. Mary's heart sinks. She can guess what happened. The boy is likely a pickpocket or caught stealing something like food. A small crowd watches as the boy is dragged toward a waiting police wagon. Victorian law can be merciless, even to children. Not long ago, that boy might have been shipped off to a penal colony in Australia for a theft, or sent to prison to do hard labor. Transportation to Australia happened until the 1860s, and even children were sent away for surprisingly petty crimes back in earlier decades. By mid-century, there's a bit more leniency. They might send him to a reformatory or a juvenile prison, but it's no picnic either. Mary has heard of those places. Strict, with harsh discipline, sometimes near starvation rations, and labor like oakum picking, teasing apart old ropes, for hours on end. She bites her lip and moves along. There's nothing she can do except feel pity. It reminds her how precarious everything is. One turn of bad luck, one mistake, and a family can be shattered. Crime is often born of desperation here, but the law doesn't much care about the why. For now, Mary's focus is on getting home and preparing something for dinner, with her scant supplies. Despite the exhausting morning, there is no rest yet for her. Let's leave Mary for a moment and turn our imagination to another part of this Victorian world that period dramas often hint at but rarely delve into fully. The brutality of child labor in places outside the city, like the coal mines of industrial Britain. Up to now, we've followed life in London, a bustling city with its mix of trades and troubles. But Victorian daily life was also playing out in coal towns, textile mill villages, and rural hamlets. To truly grasp the era's hardships, we must peek into those worlds too. But our journey doesn't end in the city streets. Now, stepping out of the London smog and traveling north to the coal country, imagine a completely different, yet equally harsh, daily reality. Picture a coal mining town in the north of England in the 1840s, just before dawn. The sky is only a shade less black than the ground. Rows of cramped, soot-stained cottages line a muddy road. Beyond them, towering pithead gear and smokestacks loom against the dim sky. A faint glow comes from the collieries where early workers have already lit their lanterns. In one of those tiny miners' cottages, a 12-year-old girl named Annie is already awake. She pulls on a pair of rough trousers, tying them with a piece of twine. Girls working in the mines often wore trousers or cut-off skirts for practical reasons. Over her thin cotton shirt, she buttons a vest. Everything is patched and ingrained with coal dust that never fully washes out. She and her family have been mining for generations. Her father, a burly man with coal-blackened skin even after washing, hands her a piece of bread smeared with lard for breakfast. It's not appetizing, but it's fuel. Annie's family leaves their cottage for the mine while the stars still speckle the sky. It's cold, a biting, moist cold of northern England, and Annie's breath fogs in the air. They join a stream of other miners trudging to the pit, lanterns bobbing like will-o'-the-wisps in the pre-dawn gloom. At the pit head, the mine captain and an overseer await. There's an iron cage elevator that will take them down into the earth. A crowd of miners, some coughing already from years of coal dust in their lungs, gather around waiting for their turn to descend. Annie's father carries the family's safety lamp, a Davy lamp, its flame enclosed to reduce the risk of igniting underground gases. They step into the elevator cage along with several other men and a couple of young boys who work as trappers, children who manage ventilation doors in the mine. With a jolt and a screech of metal, the cage begins to lower. Daylight disappears almost immediately as they sink into darkness. The ride down might be 600 or 800 feet. It feels like a slow drop into the pit of hell. The air grows dank and smells of earth and something bitter. Water drips from the cage roof onto their heads. Annie squeezes her father's calloused hand. At the bottom, they step out into the mine's main corridor. A few feeble oil lamps and candles are positioned along the walls, but beyond their small halos of light is a darkness so complete, it's almost suffocating. The miners light additional lamps, each hewer. The men who cut coal has one, and some children get a tiny candle if they are working away from the adults. The tunnels branch off in multiple directions, propped by wooden beams that creak under the weight of the ground above. Now and then, the distant sound of a pick striking coal echoes. Annie's father quickly exchanges a word with the deputy, a sort of foreman in the mine, who directs him to the coal face he'll be working today. He turns to Annie. "You know where to go, lass," he says. Annie nods. Though only 12, she's been working down here for a year already. Her job is trapper today, one of the simplest yet eeriest jobs. While her father heads with the other men down a side gallery to start cutting coal, Annie moves to take her position by a ventilation door. These heavy wooden doors help channel air through the mine. They must stay closed most of the time to force fresh air to circulate to the distant tunnels, except when a coal tub needs to come through. Annie's station is essentially a small, carved-out nook in utter darkness next to one of these doors deep in the mine. She sits on a stone slightly off the damp floor. The door is taller than her, looming in the dark. Her task, open it when she hears the rumble of a coal cart coming, then shut it again once it passes. The deputy takes the candle from Annie. Small children often weren't trusted with their own lights to save money on candles or oil, and says, "You wait here till they hears the drams, carts, then open quick, gel." And just like that he leaves, carrying off the light with him. The darkness swallows Annie. She cannot even see her hand in front of her face. The air is stuffy and cool. She can feel the vibration of distant picks through the rock, and occasionally faint shouts or coughs. Imagine being this girl, sitting alone in a lightless tunnel far below the ground. Time loses meaning. She's left alone with her thoughts, which for a child might be fanciful or fearful. Perhaps Annie hums a song to herself softly to break the silence. Maybe a hymn she learned at church, or a rude little mining ditty the boys sing. She might start counting. Her own heartbeat, the drips of water, anything to mark time. Suddenly, after what could be minutes or an hour, she can't tell, a faint rumbling sound grows louder from one side. It's the coal tub being pushed along rails by hurriers, likely teenage girls or women who drag these carts. Annie springs up and feels for the latch of the door. The coal tub needs to get through, and it's loaded high with the freshly cut coal from where her father is working. As the sound nears, she strains at the door. It's heavy, but she knows how to lever it open enough for the cart. Two sweaty, half-naked figures, a woman and a boy, appear, illuminated by a feeble lamp fixed on the cart. The woman is harnessed to the cart, with a leather belt around her waist and chained to the cart, and the boy pushes from behind. Both are smeared head to toe in coal dust. Their faces, just ghastly pale eyes and teeth in black grime. The woman, Mrs. Evans, a neighbor, pants a "thanky, love" as Annie pulls the door open. The cart squeals through the doorway. Once it's passed, Annie closes the door again and slides the latch. The darkness returns as the echoes of the cart fade. This cycle repeats all day. Annie might be perched in darkness for 40 minutes, then open the door for 30 seconds as a cart goes by, then darkness again for an hour, and so on. She must stay alert or else risk suffocating everyone, because if she falls asleep and leaves the door closed too long, ventilation suffers. If she leaves it open, the air might not flow correctly to the further reaches, and lamps could go out, or people could choke on bad air. It's a tremendous amount of responsibility for a child. Not that anyone praises her for it. It's simply expected. Deeper in the mine, her father and other men are toiling in low passages where they cannot even stand. Many coal seams are only 2 to 3 feet high. Imagine hacking away at a wall while crouched or lying on one side. With each strike of the pick, coal chips and dust fly. The men are shirtless. Their clothes would just get sodden with sweat and grime otherwise, and sweat trickles down, carving clean paths through the coal dust on their skin. The only light is from their oil lamps, casting dancing shadows on the black walls. The air is thick with coal dust. Every breath they take carries fine particles into their lungs. When they eventually spit, their saliva is black. They call it the black spit. It's a badge of their job and a harbinger of the lung troubles that will eventually plague them. Nearby, there are hurriers like Mrs. Evans whom we glimpsed, including women and children, who pull and push the coal tubs along those rails from the coal face to the shaft. The mine is hot deep down, despite the cool climate above. In some pits, it could reach 80 to 90 degrees Fahrenheit in the depths. The labor of dragging a loaded cart that might weigh several hundredweight, hundreds of pounds, in that heat is brutal. Women like Mrs. Evans often strip to the waist because of the heat and practical necessity. working bare-breasted in the dark, something that would scandalize people up on the surface, but down here is just how it's done. They wear heavy leather belts around their hips with chains, crawling on hands and knees to pull the carts, often through water or narrow corridors where they can't even kneel fully upright. Their hands and knees become calloused and scarred by constant contact with coal and stone. Every so often, the mine is shaken by a dull thump. Controlled explosions are used to blast particularly tough coal faces loose. When that happens, there's a pause as dust whooshes through the galleries, and everyone waits to see if the roof holds. They've all heard of disasters, a fire damp, methane gas explosion that can kill everyone in the shaft, or a collapse that can trap or crush. But in the daily grind, those thoughts are pushed away. They have a job to do if they want to eat. Annie's father, during a brief break to catch his breath, leans on his pick, and in the flicker of his lamp, he might see a couple of rats scurrying by. Mines have rats. They often feed on the miners' lunch scraps or dead pack animals. The men half-jokingly say the rats are their friends, because if the rats ever suddenly run all in one direction, it could warn of fire damp or flood and give the miners a chance to escape. After hours of continuous labor, a bell signals the end of the shift. In some mines, shifts could be 12 hours long, others a bit less. For Annie, that means someone finally comes to relieve her at the door. Perhaps a boy of 14 takes over for the next shift, and she's allowed to go. She and her father will join a group heading back to the pit shaft. They look like phantoms. Everyone's blackened from head to toe with coal dust, sweat leaving shiny streaks. Annie is exhausted, and her eyes burn from rubbing them with dirty hands. Yet, this is only early afternoon. Some mines ran 2 shifts, others a single long one. Let's say in this mine, they started at 6 a.m., and now it's 2 p.m., and they're done for the day. It could well have been longer, but either way, the work is soul-wearying. They crowd into the lift to ascend. The lift jolts upward, and as the daylight, likely overcast light, grows brighter above them, many blink or shield their eyes. Stepping out onto the surface is like entering another world. Cold, fresh air hits their lungs. It even makes them cough after the stale air down below, and the gray daylight feels blinding after the lamplight of the pit. Annie's legs wobble a little. She's been sitting so long in the dark that now the real world feels strange and overwhelming. The miners quickly scatter to go home. There is no company shower or change room. They simply come up as they are, dust-covered. Maybe there's a water pump where some try to rinse their faces and hands. Annie's father coughs deeply, expelling black phlegm onto the ground. He pats Annie on the back lightly. "Off home, lass," he says, voice echoey from the mine. They trudge back to their cottage, clothes clinging to their sweaty bodies in the chill breeze. At home, if they're lucky, Annie's mother, who might have been at home minding younger siblings and tending a small bit of homework like taking and mending, will have a stew or some potatoes ready. The pay from mining is slightly better than some other laboring jobs, but it's inconsistent and docked for many things, like tool sharpening or if coal output was low. The men are often paid by the ton of coal they cut, not by the hour. So if the coal was hard or their section poor, today's efforts might not amount to much money. On payday, often the miner has to go to the company store to collect provisions, and many mine owners run a scam where miners end up owing part of their wages right back for overpriced goods, a notorious practice that led to the expression, "owing my soul to the company store." After a day like today, Annie and her father, and Mrs. Evans and all their co-workers are utterly worn out. Their ears ring from the constant din, their backs ache, Their lungs feel tight. Annie's father often just lies on the floor for a few minutes upon getting home, staring at the ceiling, gathering the strength to wash up a bit and eat. Annie helps her mother ladle out broth or tea for everyone. They might discuss something small, but mostly they eat in famished silence. Working in the mines is something a child like Annie might do until a law says she can't. In fact, in 1842, Parliament will pass a law, thanks to reports by reformers horrified that women and little girls were found working half naked alongside men in these conditions, that bans women and girls, and boys under 10, from working underground in mines. That change is looming, but it's not yet in effect in Annie's imaginary scenario. When it does happen, Annie, if she's lucky, might get out of the pit and perhaps do work above ground like sorting coal, or find a job in a textile mill or as a domestic servant. But thousands of other little children will take the places of those slightly older because the work still needs doing, and enforcement of new laws can be lax at first. Stepping away from the coal mine now, consider what we've seen. The utter darkness and isolation Annie faced, the grueling labor of her father and the hurriers, the health risks. Period dramas rarely, if ever, take us down there. They might show a grimy man emerging from a mine or a passing reference to coal, but can you recall a lavish TV series lingering in a suffocating mine shaft with a child trembling in the dark? Unlikely. Yet, for tens of thousands of Victorian families in mining regions, Wales, Northern England, Scotland, that was daily life. It was said that in some mining towns, you could spot the miners walking home at sunset with their lamplights flickering across the hills, like a trail of fireflies in the dusk, an image romantic to imagine now. But each of those lights represented someone who likely died far earlier than they should have, worn out by that brutal existence. Now, let's surface from the mines and travel to yet another facet of Victorian life that balances on the edge of brutality and necessity, the world of factories and mills. For this, we can imagine someone like William, a young man we mentioned earlier in Mary's thoughts. Say he was a country lad from a farming village who couldn't make ends meet on the land. He came to the industrial city of Manchester in the 1850s, seeking work in the booming textile mills. William, at 18, found a job in a cotton mill. The first day he entered the spinning room, he was overwhelmed by the noise, a deafening clatter of hundreds of machines, belts whirring, looms pounding. The air was hot and filled with cotton fluff that danced in the sunlight beaming through high windows. He was assigned as a piecer, tending a row of spinning machines that twist cotton fibers into thread. His job was to watch for broken threads and quickly tie them, piece them, back together without stopping the machine. On his hands and knees, he went under the machines, where gears and belts whizzed dangerously close to his head, and he deftly gathered broken ends to tie. It was a skilled job requiring quick fingers and vigilance, because if a machine stopped or threads tangled badly, the overseer would yell and possibly fine him, deduct wages for the lost production. At first, William fumbled a lot. The machines moved so fast. But he learned. Still, he saw children younger than him in the mill. Lots of them. Some as young as 10 or 12, before the law said they had to be older, worked as scavengers, darting under the machinery to sweep up cotton lint and retrieve fallen threads, doing exactly what he was doing now as an adult. Those kids were quick and small, but sometimes not quick enough. One poor girl had her finger crushed under a spinning mule carriage because she didn't pull away in time. The overseers in the mill walked the aisles with straps or sticks. One older boy next to William had the habit of slowing down when exhausted. and William winced seeing the overseer smack that boy's back with a leather strap to encourage him. Physical punishment was common in early factories, especially on child workers. Over time, some of these abuses lessened, thanks to public outcry and new regulations, but in mid-century, it still happened behind those walls. A typical workday for William at the mill starts at 6 a.m. A bell rings in the factory courtyard to summon all hands. If he's even 5 minutes late, the huge entry gates might be locked, and he loses a quarter day's pay, or even his job. Punctuality is drilled into them. They break maybe at noon for 30 minutes to eat a bit of bread or porridge they brought in a tin pail. Then back to the machines until perhaps 6 p.m. That's a 12-hour day, 6 days a week. Only Sunday is a day of rest, and often compulsory church attendance, which factory owners liked because it promoted a docile, obedient workforce. Each evening, William trudges back to his lodging, a tiny rented room he shares with 2 other young men, with his ears ringing. The constant factory din has made his hearing dull. He often hears a faint phantom of machine noise even when in silence, a sort of incessant whir in his head. His lungs are irritated from inhaling cotton dust. He sometimes coughs up black-specked phlegm, not unlike a miner, just a different dust. The mill provided no protective gear. Only in the late 1800s would some places start addressing ventilation seriously. At home, by candlelight, William sometimes writes a letter to his family back on the farm. He doesn't tell them every truth, like how the foreman cursed at him that week, or how one of his roommates caught factory fever, an illness like bronchitis from the dust, and died in their room with no doctor to tend him. Instead, he says he's doing fine, learning a lot, making steady wages. He might mention that he saw a football match on his half-day off last Saturday. By the 1880s, football is becoming a popular organized sport for workers to watch and play, an exciting development. Or that he saved a few shillings to buy a decent wool coat for the winter. He wants to reassure his aging parents that moving to the city was a good idea, even if privately he sometimes misses the fresh fields and quiet nights of the countryside. Now, William is fictional, but his story stands in for millions. Victorian Britain was the first industrial nation, and its factories were marvels of productivity, but at human cost. Many period dramas like to showcase the grand inventions and rich industrialists, or maybe briefly depict an idyllic rural scene. But seldom do we sit with the reality of a factory floor, the heat, the danger, the regimentation, often military-like discipline in those mills. We should also consider female factory workers. Thousands of young women worked in textile mills like William. They were called factory girls and often lived in cramped hostels or lodgings, sometimes preyed upon by unscrupulous men or factory supervisors. They earned independent wages, which was a new kind of freedom, but it came with exploitation and risk. In fact, women made up a significant part of the industrial workforce in textiles. They too endured long hours, and although they rarely got beaten physically like child apprentices might, they faced sexual harassment and the general wear and tear of factory life. Some factories were more dangerous than others. Workers in match factories, for example, mostly women and teenage girls, had to handle white phosphorus, which could lead to a horrific condition known as phossy jaw. This was not widely known to the public until later, but those girls would get toothaches, and their jaws would literally begin to rot from the inside, glowing green at night and emitting foul discharge, eventually leading to seizures or death if untreated, the only treatment often being to remove the jawbone. Employers mostly ignored this until the women themselves and activists forced changes, like the famous matchgirls strike of 1888. William is thankful he didn't end up in such a hellish job. Let's return to London now, where evening has fallen once more over the Harris family's neighborhood. The feeble daylight faded hours ago, and now the streets are enshrouded in shadow. Remember those gas lamps that were lit by the lamplighters? They cast an intermittently spaced glow along the main roads, but many alleys and courts are left in almost total darkness. This is the time when another side of Victorian life awakens. Those who must make their living at night, and those who prey on them or slip into the cracks of respectability under cover of darkness. Picture a narrow lane not far from where John and Mary live, perhaps near a market that's closed up for the night. Beneath one flickering gas lamp stands a young woman named Emily. She's about 22, but hard living makes her look older. She wears a worn, once fancy dress, maybe satin, now stained and frayed, and a threadbare shawl pulled tight around her against the chill. Her cheeks are rouged, using a cheap red cosmetic, and her hair is arranged in what she hopes is an enticing way, though bits are coming loose. Emily is a prostitute, or as polite society might say, a fallen woman, or an unfortunate. She loiters, shifting from one foot to the other in her scuffed boots, scanning the street for potential customers. Perhaps a gentleman slightly drunk and lost on his way home, or a soldier or sailor with a few coins to spare. It's a dangerous game. She has known other girls who went with the wrong man and ended up beaten badly, or worse. Even the police can be cruel. While a few officers might look the other way or sympathetically warn her to be careful, others will arrest prostitutes just to fill quotas or get bribes. And the public largely scorns her. If a respectable lady or gentleman passes by, they might cross the street with a look of disgust, as if Emily carries a plague. Tonight, Emily sees two men in the distance. She plasters on a smile and calls softly, "Evenin', dears." Looking for a bit of company? One man snorts and keeps walking. The other hesitates. He's young, perhaps a clerk with a meager salary, but lonely or curious. After a brief negotiation in hushed tones, he passes her a coin, maybe 2 shillings, a paltry sum for such a risk, but Emily will take it, and they disappear down a dark passage to do their business. It's quick and often brutal. Emily endures because she needs that money to pay for a doss house bed or food for the next day. She mentally distances herself during the act, staring at the brick wall and thinking of something else, maybe humming a lullaby in her head that her mother used to sing. When the man leaves, Emily adjusts her clothing, pocketing the coin deep in her bodice. She feels a mix of relief and self-loathing that never really goes away. She once had dreams of a normal life, a husband, a little home. But those dreams crumbled when her husband, a dock laborer like John, died in an accident and she was left widowed with a baby. Workhouse or the streets were her options then. She tried charring, scrubbing floors, cleaning houses. But with a baby to care for and no one to mind him, it fell apart. Her baby actually died in infancy, common for poor infants, of fever or maybe malnutrition. She doesn't like to remember that time. And so, with nothing left to lose, she ended up like this. As Emily steps back into the gaslight, wiping a bit of blood from the corner of her mouth, the man had been rough. She cannot help but feel the weight of danger around her. Only a year or two ago, there were gruesome murders in Whitechapel. The infamous Jack the Ripper slayings of 1888. Everyone in her line of work knows about that horror. How someone, never caught, slashed and mutilated several street women in the dead of night. Those killings terrified her and her peers. Some left the trade out of fear, Others carried knives or kept to better lit areas. For a while, police presence had increased and clients were scarce, but eventually things went back to grim normal. Still, in the back of her mind, Emily knows that any night could be her last, if not by a ripper, perhaps by disease. Syphilis, the French disease, is rampant and incurable in this era, slowly destroying the mind and body. She tries not to think on it. She just hopes to survive until morning, take her few shillings, and maybe someday, somehow, find a way out. Perhaps a regular gentleman who might take her as a mistress or help set her up in a little shop. Unlikely, but hope is sometimes all she has. This world of prostitutes is another rarely illuminated facet of Victorian life behind the genteel curtain. There were estimated tens of thousands of women selling sex in London alone during this period, from high-class courtesans serving rich aristocrats, the only ones who sometimes show up in period dramas as sultry, scandalous figures, down to the penniless streetwalkers like Emily, who were far more common and far more invisible in historical narratives. Society at large either pretended they didn't exist or blamed them entirely for moral corruption. The Contagious Diseases Acts of the 1860s even allowed police to arrest women suspected of prostitution in certain towns and force them to undergo invasive checks for venereal disease, all to protect men, soldiers and sailors primarily, from infection, with little regard for the women's rights or welfare. That tells you what value was placed on these women's lives. Now, let's check back with John. It's early evening, and John's long day at the dock is finally done. Muscles trembling with fatigue, he and the other laborers receive their pay from the foreman, counted out in coins. Today was a full day's labor. John earns a solid 3 shillings. There was extra cargo, plus a small bonus for quick work. He carefully tucks the coins into a sewn-in pocket in his trousers, separate from anything else, as those coins are literally the difference between dinner and hunger at home. He shoulders his way out of the dock gates, which close behind the departing workers. Many of his colleagues immediately head to the nearest pub to quench their thirst and ease their aches with strong ale or cheap gin. There's a pub on the corner, already glowing with gaslight and bustling with dockers. John is tempted. Oh, how nice it would be to down a pint right now, but he forces himself to keep walking. Maybe he'll allow himself 1/2 pint on the way home, but he must not fritter away the precious pay. Mary will need most of it for rent, due at week's end, and food, and he promised to try to bring something nice for supper. He stops by a baker still open and buys a fresh loaf of bread, spending a few pence. Bread is life. Fresh, soft bread is a treat. At the butcher, he manages to find a scrap of meat, a small piece of salt pork that might do to add into a stew. Not expensive, but it will add flavor and a bit of protein for the children. The butcher, seeing it's late and that piece might not sell tomorrow, gives John a slight discount. Coins already slipping away, John then indulgently buys 2 hot-baked potatoes from a street vendor, a kind man who sells big potatoes roasted in an iron oven on wheels. They're not too pricey and will be warm in his pockets, as well as a ready bite for the family tonight, without extra cooking. The vendor wraps them in paper, and John juggles them between his hands from the heat, smiling. He knows Tom and Lizzie will enjoy a nice soft potato for supper. Walking home, John's steps are slower now, exhaustion creeping in, but the thought of seeing his family spurs him on. He passes a ragged figure of a one-legged former soldier selling matches on a street corner. The man wears a tattered old regimental coat and has his medals pinned proudly, though his face is weathered and sad. John recognizes him as a Crimean War veteran who frequently begs around these parts. John doesn't have much to spare, but remembering the sacrifices of such men, the Crimean War was only a few years past and many returned to poverty. He quietly slips the fellow a halfpenny and accepts a box of matches he likely didn't even need. "God bless ye," the veteran whispers hoarsely. John nods, gripping the warm bread and potatoes in his other hand. There but for fortune, he thinks. Back in their little home, Mary has the children busy with minor tasks to keep them occupied. Tom returned from his paper route earlier and proudly handed over his earnings. A few pennies plus a halfpenny tip some kindly reader gave him. Mary praised him and tucked the coins away to add to their budget. She gave Tom and Lizzie the small treat of the peppermint candies they got from church on Sunday, letting them each have one now. The children have been playing quietly, Tom whittling a bit of wood into a toy shape, with a knife that's really just a sharp pocket knife nub, and Lizzie dressing her rag doll. The old grandmother dozes fitfully. Mary has a pot simmering on the stove. Into the water she's put the carrots and greens she bought, plus the little scrap of bacon for flavor. It's a very thin soup, more water than anything, but she's hoping John might bring something to add. As if on cue, footsteps echo on the stairs outside and the door opens. John is home. Little Lizzie squeals, "Papa," and runs to him. He scoops her up with one arm despite his fatigue, giving her a kiss on the forehead. Tom jumps up too, grinning. Mary turns, and immediately her eyes dart to John's face to gauge how the day went. She sees a tired but slight smile, and the loaf of bread tucked under his arm, and exhales in relief. He was able to get work and even bring extra. John sets Lizzie down and produces the 2 hot potatoes from his pockets. "Look what I got for you," he says, as the children's faces light up. A warm, baked potato to them is as exciting as cake. Mary takes them to cut into halves so they all can share. He also reveals the bread and small pork piece. Mary's heart swells. Fresh bread and meat, however small. Tonight they'll eat decently. Before diving into dinner, John takes a moment to remove his boots. His feet are blistered and damp, and wash his hands and face at the basin. The water turns gray as the cold dust and grime come off. Mary brings him a tin cup of the tavern broth she got, reheated on the stove, as a sort of appetizer to warm him. He thanks her softly. They don't embrace openly, because touching with all the kids and mother-in-law around isn't their habit, but Mary does briefly rest her hand on his arm, a silent, "I'm glad you're home safe." Dinner, such as it is, commences. They all sit around their little wooden crate that serves as a table. Mary ladles out the vegetable soup into everyone's bowl, children first, then the elders. She stretched it with some barley, and the new piece of pork John brought is thrown in and will simmer for flavor. It likely won't even soften in time to eat tonight, but tomorrow it will be better. Each person also gets half of a baked potato, fluffy and steaming. Mary sprinkles a tiny pinch of salt on the children's portions as a treat. And there is the fresh bread. John slices it with his pocket knife, and unlike the hard loaf of the morning, this one is soft enough for Lizzie to chew easily. The smell of it is incredible to them. This is a finer meal than they've had in days. Little Lizzie, after scarfing her potato, pipes up hopefully, "More, Mama?" Her bowl is empty, and she's licking the spoon. Mary gently shakes her head, stroking the child's hair. "That's all for now, dear heart. We must save some for tomorrow." Lizzie pouts a bit, but Tom, being a protective older brother, leans over and tickles her side, pulling a funny face. She giggles, forgetting her request, and everyone chuckles softly. Even the old grandmother smiles. Moments of laughter are precious. After supper, The family feels a warmth and a dull fullness in their bellies that makes them drowsy. John, lean as he is, even had a small second helping of soup, making him feel almost luxuriant. They gather around the little stove, where a modest fire still crackles with the last bits of coal. It's one of the few times they can all relax together. Perhaps they talk a bit. John mentions that there might be more unloading work later in the week, always thinking ahead anxiously. Mary shares a piece of neighborhood news, like Mrs. Fowler next door got a letter from her son in the Navy, or the price of candles is going up. Tom eagerly tells John how he delivered all his papers on time, and one of the customers, a kindly older lady, gave him a biscuit. He even saved a tiny piece of that biscuit wrapped in cloth to share with Lizzie, which Mary had earlier divided between the children, so each got a crumb of sweet, buttery taste. John pats his son's shoulder proudly, praising him for being responsible and generous with his sister. As the night deepens outside, the sounds of the city change. There's still the distant clip-clop of a carriage carrying some late traveler, and occasional laughter or singing from a pub a few streets away. But in their alley, most windows are dark now. People turn in early because they rise early, and because lamp oil and candles cost money. Through the thin walls, they hear one neighbor couple murmuring, maybe a rare tender moment or planning the next day. From another room comes a rhythmic creaking and muffled voices, a marital quarrel, or perhaps just someone shifting in bed. One sound makes Mary and John pause. A sudden shout from below, a woman's voice crying, "Stop it, leave me be," and a man's angry slur. It sounds like a domestic fight brewing, likely fueled by gin. Mary bites her lip. The instinct is to maybe go knock on the door or shout, "Quiet down." But she knows better. If a man is beating his wife, an outsider's interference could make it worse. Plus, police intervention in domestic matters is rare, and the community often considers it their business. This is sadly common. Nearly every wife Mary knows has at some point been struck by her husband. Victorian society largely condones a husband's right to discipline his wife and children physically, as long as it's not too extreme. There's an old saying about a man being allowed to beat his wife with a stick no thicker than his thumb, possibly apocryphal, but reflective of the attitude. Mary unconsciously rubs her upper arm, recalling a bruise John left years ago in a moment of frustration. He was ashamed and never did it again. But not all men restrain themselves. They all listen in silence as the downstairs altercation subsides with a final crash. Perhaps a chair knocked over, and then crying. Little Lizzie looks wide-eyed, and Mary quickly distracts her. "Come, help Mama fold the blankets for bed." The thin walls have ears. It's best not to pry openly. It's now time to settle down for the night. There is no separate bedroom, of course. The family's sleeping arrangements are what they were in the morning. John and Mary's straw mattress on the floor in one corner, the children's pallet in another, Granny's cot by the opposite wall. They prepare for bed by simply removing outer garments. John keeps on his shirt and just removes his trousers. He'll fold them as a pillow. Mary takes off her day dress and puts on a simple cotton smock she wears at night. The children already nod off while Mary is gently washing their faces with a cloth, a token attempt at hygiene to get rid of the day's grime. Before blowing out the candle, Mary does a quick once-over. She secures the room's door latch, not that it would stop a determined intruder, but it eases her mind against any drunk stumbling in by mistake. She tends to her mother-in-law, helping her lie down and tucking the quilt around her thin shoulders. The old woman wheezes a thank you and closes her eyes. Mary then checks on Tom and Lizzie, who share the pile of rags and old blanket. Lizzie is already curled up against Tom, her little thumb in her mouth. Tom sleepily smiles up at his mother. She strokes his hair and whispers, "Good night, love." John, utterly spent, eases himself down onto their straw-filled sack mattress. He winces. His back has stiffened and every muscle protests. Mary scoots in beside him. They have one blanket, which they spread over themselves. The warmth of two bodies will help on this cold night. But still, it's a sparse comfort. As they lie there, Mary can't fall asleep immediately. She listens to the children's soft breathing, and then to John's heavier exhale. He's already drifting off, snoring lightly after mere minutes. She, however, is often kept awake by worry or by the discomfort of being in a cramped space with 5 other breathing bodies. Tonight, one worry edges into her mind: baby overlaying. In these tight quarters, sharing beds, it's not uncommon for an infant or young child to suffocate accidentally under a heavy sleeping adult or tangled in blankets. She glances to ensure Lizzie isn't too smothered against Tom, and that Granny is okay. Infants are at highest risk, but still Mary checks. Sadly, Mary has known neighbors who lost a baby this way, a tragedy so frequent among the poor that coroners often just ruled accidental suffocation without much inquiry. They even coined that term, overlaying, for the awful event. Mary's heart clenches at the thought. Only when she hears the reassuring soft snores of both her children does she allow herself to relax a little. She sends a fleeting prayer upward, thanking God for getting them through another day and pleading for their safety through the night. Around them in the dark, the quiet scratching of rats in the walls and the occasional tickle of a flea or bed bug in the straw mattress are bothersome, but these are such constant companions that the family is accustomed. If you wake at 2 a.m. in a slum tenement, you might feel a bedbug's bite or hear a mouse scuttle by, but you likely just scratch, sigh, and roll over. Such pests are part of Victorian nightlife too, the unseen parasites that plagued rich and poor alike, though in filthy, crowded quarters, they're far more numerous. The Harris family, like everyone around, has their share of bites and itches. Tonight is no exception. Mary slaps lightly at an itch on her ankle, but she's too tired to care beyond that. Finally, Mary closes her eyes. The candle is blown out. Their home is in complete darkness, save for a faint orange glow of the stove's embers. The wind outside picks up a little, rattling the window pane, but inside, snug under the blanket, Mary and John share a bit of body warmth. Though John's back aches and Mary's arms are sore, there is comfort in togetherness. They survived another day in Victorian London. Little victories, a warm meal, earned wages, family safe at night. Now, not everyone in the city is fortunate enough to have even this modicum of peace at night. Let's drift a few blocks over to an imposing building we mentioned earlier, the workhouse. We saw Mary contemplating it on her way back and dread it. Workhouses were the last refuge for those with nowhere else to go, or for those the city found on the streets and deemed should be indoors. Tonight, in the Bethnal Green workhouse, for example, the wards are filled with the poor unfortunates of all ages. In a long dormitory room that smells of a mixture of chloride of lime disinfectant, sweat, and despair, rows of narrow beds stretch out. The lighting is dim, a few gas jets turned low or some oil lamps. Here lies a middle-aged man with one leg, lost his limb and then his job, ended up here. Next to him, a gaunt youth who might be developmentally disabled. His family perhaps cast him off to the institution. A bit further is an old man, muttering in his sleep. dreaming maybe of the days when he was free and had a trade. In another ward, separated by iron-barred partitions to keep the genders apart, there are women. One we recognize, Alice, Mary's widowed friend who reluctantly came here with her children. Alice is, at this very moment, lying on a hard cot, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. She cried earlier, after her brief evening visit with her children ended. They allowed her to see them for one precious hour, supervised by a matron. Her little ones clung to her and begged to not be sent back to the children's dormitory. But of course, she had to let go when the time was up. Now her tears are dry and only silent misery remains. Tomorrow, she'll be up at 5:30 a.m. to start the day's work. Perhaps picking oakum, untwisting old ship ropes into fibers, an endless, tedious task that makes her fingers bleed, or scrubbing the workhouse floors. The food they gave her for supper, a bowl of gruel and a hunk of bread, sits heavy in her stomach, tasteless and humiliating. She overhears a woman in the next bed whispering a prayer. Others just snore or cough. One younger woman, not 20, sobs quietly. She's a new admission, unmarried and pregnant, terrified of what's to come. The workhouse will care for her until her baby is born, then likely take the baby from her and send it to a foundling home, and send her to the laundry to work. A weak cry echoes down the corridor, likely a sick person or a disturbed soul in one of the wards. An attendant eventually shushes them. Strict rules enforce silence at night. The workhouse master does rounds occasionally, making sure all is in order. He passes by the casual ward as well. That's where the homeless can get a one-night stay on those benches or cells in exchange for doing some heavy labor the next day. It's basically a stone room with individual compartments. Tonight, a handful of homeless men are locked in there, sleeping on boards with only a thin blanket. They got a chunk of bread and some water upon admission, and will be expected to break a pile of rocks or scrub something extremely filthy in the morning before they are allowed to leave. If you could hover above the workhouse, you would see it's like a cold fortress amid the city. By design, life inside is made as undesirable as possible. They believed if you make it too easy, people would flock to be lazy in the workhouse, an unlikely scenario given any self-respecting poor person avoided it like the plague. The workhouse era would officially end in the 20th century, but in the Victorian time, it's in full force. Many buildings, like the one we're imagining, even in the 21st century, have been repurposed into hospitals or museums, silent witnesses to those stories of hardship. From that bleak scene, let's lighten our step a bit. Not everything in Victorian daily life was unrelenting gloom. Humans, as we said, find ways to persevere and even moments of joy. And in the late Victorian era, there were actually more and more opportunities for leisure and small pleasures, even for the working class. Think of a typical Sunday in the 1880s for the Harris family, when times perhaps have improved slightly. Sunday was legally and culturally a day of rest. No work, factories and docks closed, and most shops shut by law at least for morning church hours. For many, it was the only day they could sleep a bit longer and wear their Sunday best. Imagine a Sunday morning where, for once, Mary and John aren't jolted awake by an alarm or hunger. The pale winter sun finds them still under the blankets at 7 a.m., a luxury compared to weekdays. When they do rise, they take their time dressing. Mary in a slightly nicer gown she kept clean, the one she might have worn to church on her wedding day years ago, mended lovingly. And John, in a clean shirt and trousers with his coat brushed. The children are scrubbed extra well, faces shining, and put into the outfits Mary reserves for church. Tom wearing a little waistcoat that's a bit short in the arm now. He's growing so fast. And Lizzie in a plain cotton dress with a ribbon in her hair. These clothes have been mended and let out over and over, but Mary does her best to make them presentable. They walk together to the nearby chapel. Many other families from the neighborhood join, forming a small stream of people headed in the same direction. The church bells ring out, calling them to worship. The church itself is nothing grand, not one of those Gothic-spired ones in city centers, but a modest brick building seating maybe 100 souls. Inside, it's chilly, only a couple of stoves for heat. But the atmosphere is solemn and uplifting at once. They settle into a pew. Mary finds comfort in these routines, the familiar prayers, the rustle of hymn book pages, even the parson's droning sermon. She particularly loves the hymns. When the organ, a wheezy small organ, starts to play Abide With Me, a gentle, well-known hymn, she joins in with fervor. The simple melody and words about seeking God's help in darkness resonate with her profoundly. She holds Lizzie on her lap and gently rocks her in time with the music, whisper singing the chorus in the little one's ear. Tom stands next to John, trying to follow along in the hymn book, though he reads only slowly. Still, he belts out the bits he knows by heart. John, not a particularly devout or musical man, nonetheless sings too, more quietly, because it reminds him of his own childhood Sundays in the village church, one of the few peaceful memories he has. The sermon today touches on finding contentment in one's station and trusting in God's plan. John sometimes bristles at that message. Easy for the parson to say, with his guaranteed meals and respectable life, but there's also mention of hope and charity, which John appreciates. The parson speaks about how trials on earth will be rewarded in heaven, how every suffering is noted by the Almighty. Mary soaks that in as a balm. It's how she copes, believing a better reward awaits beyond this life. After service, there is a bit of social mingling outside. Families greet each other. The parson's wife comes over to admire how big Tom and Lizzie have grown. She kindly slips Mary a gift, a loaf of bread from the church donations, and, wrapped in cloth, a bar of soap. Mary flushes with gratitude and slight embarrassment as she accepts. Such gestures mean her children will have toast tonight, and she can properly wash them. "Thank you, ma'am," she says earnestly. The parson himself chats with John. "Good to see you and the family, Mr. Harris." John, hat in hand, nods respectfully. The parson might not know the details of their struggles, but his presence and the community sense at church gives John a rare feeling of dignity, being addressed as an equal in the eyes of God at least. Sunday dinner is next. Often, the Harrises save any slightly better food for this meal. Perhaps Mary managed to get a bit of meat, or John saved a few pennies to buy a small joint of beef or a chicken on Saturday. Let's say today there's a small piece of beef brisket they've been keeping on ice in a bucket outside the window. Mary boils it with potatoes and carrots. The smell fills the room, and even neighbors sniff the air appreciatively. Everyone does similar on Sundays when they can. It's almost a festive atmosphere weekly, knowing most working folk are cooking something special. They say Victorian England's working class lived from payday to payday, and Sunday dinner was when they'd eat best, sometimes spending 1/3 of their weekly food budget on that one meal. Today, the Harris family sits down to a true treat. Tender meat, each gets a few slices, soft carrots, real gravy, not just salt and water. They even have a bit of Sunday pudding. Maybe Mary made a simple sweat pudding with treacle. It's warm, sticky sweet, and utterly beloved by the children. After eating, John actually gets a chance to rest. He settles in the chair by the stove, feeling pleasantly full. a rare sensation. The children play quietly. Tom has a homemade spinning top he takes outside to twirl with a friend, and Lizzie rocks her doll. Mary folds some laundry or works on sewing a patch on Tom's trousers, but without hurry. The day feels almost peaceful. Outside, other families stroll in their Sunday best. Some head to Victoria Park, if one is nearby, or just saunter down the main road greeting friends. In the summer, they might even take a day trip to the seaside on a special excursion train. By the 1870s to 80s, rail companies sometimes offered cheap Sunday fares to places like Brighton or Margate, giving working-class families a whiff of the ocean air. But today, they stay local. In the late afternoon, John does something he hardly ever has time or energy for on a weekday. He plays with his children. He might join Tom in a simple game of catch in the alley, or help him carve that bit of wood into a proper toy boat shape. For Lizzie, he might bounce her on his knee and sing an old folk tune, making her shriek with laughter. Mary watches with a smile while mending socks, her heart warmed by seeing them all like this. As evening falls on Sunday, a calm contentment descends. Many families by now are eating a light supper, often leftovers from midday, and then preparing for the work week ahead. John takes a few minutes to polish his boots and knock the coal dust off his coat. He likes to start Monday with at least a semblance of order. Mary makes sure Tom's little stack of the next day's newspapers, delivered to him earlier, are tied neatly for the morning. They light a single lamp as dusk deepens, eking out the last tasks of the day under its soft glow. If there's one luxury they indulge in on Sunday nights, it might be reading aloud or telling stories. Some literate members of the working class did enjoy penny dreadfuls or newspapers. Perhaps Tom has borrowed an old copy of the Illustrated London News or a cheap adventure pamphlet from a friend. By lamplight, John might read out a bit, slowly and stumbling on longer words. His reading isn't very strong. He learned mostly through the church and Tom's help, ironically. But it captivates the kids. The story might be lurid and exciting, about highwaymen or far-off jungles. Or Mary, who remembers a few folk tales her mother told her, might recite a fairy story about a wise fox or a fairy queen, to the children's delight. This gentle family time is as precious as gold. It knits them together emotionally to face the grinding week to come. Eventually, yawns signal time for bed. They tuck in earlier on Sundays, since Monday's alarm will ring before dawn. Sundays offer a glimpse into the soul of these people. They cherished community, faith, family, and the tiniest comforts when they could get them. It was these moments that gave meaning to their toil, that reminded them they were human beings with dignity, not just hands or paupers, as society often labeled them. Now, as our journey through Victorian daily life nears its close, let's reflect on the contrasts and transformations we've witnessed. We ventured through crowded slums and shadowy mines, into factories, and even behind the closed doors of workhouses. We also glimpsed resilience, a mother finding hope in a hymn, children laughing over a shared biscuit crumb, workers uniting in small acts of solidarity. It's amazing and sobering to think of the contrasts we've encountered tonight. For every elegant ballroom dance we envision from a Jane Austen novel or a Bridgerton episode, there were scores of chimney sweeps coughing up soot in cramped flues. For every genteel lady enjoying afternoon tea on a manicured lawn, there were thousands of women scrubbing laundry in scalding washhouses or hunched over their sewing by candlelight until their eyes and backs ached. For every well-tailored gentleman strolling with a gold-tipped cane, 100 grimy laborers were heaving cargo or shoveling coal, building the wealth that kept those gentlemen's hands clean. Victorian Britain's achievements, its industrial might, its vast empire, its refined culture, were built on the backs of ordinary people enduring extraordinary hardships. This isn't to lay individual blame, but to illuminate the fuller picture. Comfort and refinement for the few were sustained by the sweat and suffering of the many. It was a world of stark inequality, where the accident of birth largely determined whether your daily life was cushioned by privilege or ground down by toil. Yet change was in the air as the 19th century progressed. The very brutality we've explored sparked movements for reform. Human compassion and a sense of justice slowly expanded. By the late Victorian era, people like John and Mary saw improvements, however small. Laws limited child labor and working hours for women. Education was becoming accessible. By the 1880s, both Tom and Lizzie might attend school thanks to compulsory education acts. Imagine that. Lizzie in 1890 at age 10, sitting in a classroom learning to write on a slate instead of cleaning a rich lady's chamber pot, a monumental societal shift. Cities built proper sewers and provided cleaner water after terrifying cholera epidemics. Remember the great stink of 1858, when the Thames smelled so foul on a hot summer that Parliament had to stop sessions. It finally spurred action. The engineer, Joseph Bazalgette, constructed a modern sewer system in London in the 1860s that dramatically reduced disease. Workers began to organize. By the 1880s, even impoverished laborers were finding a voice through new trade unions and strikes. We mentioned the matchgirls strike of 1888. Young women from a match factory, tired of phossy jaw and poor pay, stood up to their bosses and won some concessions, drawing public sympathy. In 1889, the Great Dock Strike saw men like John demand a fairer wage. The dockers' tanner, they wanted 6 pence an hour. And after weeks of holding out, they succeeded in improving conditions a bit. These events were remarkable. They showed that through unity and sheer persistence, those at the bottom could force change. It planted seeds for the labor movements and social safety nets we benefit from today. Our Victorian ancestors also pushed for political reform. Over the century, voting rights incrementally expanded to include more of the middle and working classes, though full universal suffrage, including women, would wait into the 20th century. Public consciousness was awakened by writers like Charles Dickens, who, with novels like Oliver Twist and Hard Times, shone a light on child abuse, legal injustice, and factory conditions, and by journalists and philanthropists who documented slum life, forcing the comfortable to face the uncomfortable truths. Slowly, very slowly, this led to legislation, the Factory Acts, the Public Health Acts, the Poor Law Reforms. One day, in the early 20th century, the workhouse doors would close for good, replaced by more humane welfare systems. One day, a child like Annie would not be allowed miles under the earth, but would be required to be in school. One day, a man like John might have the protection of a union, or at least accident compensation if hurt on the job. Those one days were dreamed of and fought for during the Victorian era by courageous individuals and groups, from well-known figures like Lord Shaftesbury, who championed labor reforms, and Florence Nightingale, who revolutionized nursing and hospital conditions, to countless unsung heroes like that teacher who made sure Tom could read, or that doctor who gave free care to the slum sick, or simply neighbors who formed communities in adversity. Tonight, as we draw the curtains on our journey to the Victorian past, we can't help but feel a profound appreciation and perhaps a bit of awe. Awe at the resilience of ordinary people who lived without any of the modern comforts we casually depend on, yet found ways to maintain their dignity, humor, and hope, and appreciation for the legacy their struggles left us. so many things we might take for granted: child labor laws, safe working conditions, public schools, sanitation, even the idea of weekends and leisure, were born out of the hardships and advocacy of that era. The Victorians lived in a world on the cusp of modernity. They experienced massive changes: railways, electric lights by the 1880s, telegraphs connecting continents. Yet at the same time, daily existence for the masses remained as raw and elemental as it had been for centuries. Get up, work, or starve. Try to keep your family fed and sheltered. Collapse into bed. Repeat. We saw that play out in excruciating detail. But also how by the end of Queen Victoria's reign, 1901, there was a glimmer that life was starting to ease, just a bit, for the average Briton. Life expectancy edged up as infant mortality fell with better public health. Literacy rates surged because of schooling. A working-class political consciousness grew. As we finally leave Victorian England behind and return to our own time, it's worth taking a moment to count our blessings. If you have a soft bed, clean water, electric light to read by, healthcare, the freedom to pursue education or a career of your choice, you are enjoying luxuries that many of our Victorian forebears would have considered near miraculous. The contrast between then and now is as stark as that between a grand mansion and a workhouse. Yet, despite how far we've come, the core human experience connects us. We heard Victorian parents singing lullabies and children playing in the street, moments that any generation can relate to. We felt their worries about rent, about health, about the future of their kids. Worries that, though the context changes, remain relatable. And above all, we felt their humanity. That's the key thing to carry away. These were people who laughed, cried, dreamed, and persevered, just like people do today, only under conditions we would find unbelievably tough. Now, our late-night journey has been a long and detailed one. I appreciate you staying with me through each twist and turn of those gas-lit lanes and coal-black tunnels. I hope it has opened your eyes and maybe tugged your heart to the reality behind the romantic images of the Victorian age. The next time you watch a period drama set in this era, you'll remember that beyond the candlelight and silk gowns, there were crowded tenements and overworked folks unseen in the background. History is not just about queens and inventors, but about families like the Harrisons, little girls like Annie, seamstresses like Emma, and even unfortunates like Emily. They lived those rough days so that eventually change had to happen. In many ways, their struggles and incremental victories paved the way for the comforts many of us enjoy today. We truly stand on the shoulders of those who suffered and strove in the past. Now, it's very late. You've been patient and attentive through some grim and some heartwarming scenes. Take a deep, slow breath now. We're back in our time, in a hopefully cozy space. Perhaps you're tucked up in bed or lounging on a sofa. Feel the softness of your pillow or the warmth of your blanket. Let yourself gently transition from these heavy thoughts to a place of rest. Before we part, let's allow one more moment of empathy. In your mind, perhaps say a quiet goodnight to John and Mary and their children. Envision that despite all their trials, at this very moment we imagine, midnight of some long ago day, they are together, safe for the night, with full stomachs, little Lizzie tucked between her parents to keep warm and Tom snoring softly. The worst dangers have passed for now, and in the stillness, they have each other. Send them a wish across time, that they sleep deeply, free from fear or want, at least for this night. All right, dear listener, it's time for us to return fully to the present and for you to get some restful sleep. Thank you for coming on this journey with me, through the foggy alleys and flickering candlelight, through hardship and hope. History isn't always pretty, but it is always enlightening to see how people before us lived, endured, and overcame. Until our next adventure together, I invite you to reflect on the human capacity for resilience and change. If those Victorian families could find moments of love and joy in such conditions, surely we can cultivate gratitude and strength in our lives today. Sleep well, and until our next journey through time, I bid you a gentle good night and pleasant dreams. Take care. Good night, dear friends. Pleasant dreams.